I was about to take a bite when my phone buzzed softly against the table. I glanced down, pretending to adjust my napkin. "Don't eat, just trust me." It was from my mom, 3 seats away, smiling politely like nothing was wrong. Her message hit me like ice water. My fingers went cold, my throat dried instantly. Across the table, my husband lifted his glass, wearing that carefully rehearsed smile that never reached his eyes. "Please," he said cheerfully, "enjoy." Everyone raised their glasses. Crystal clinked softly. I forced a smile and raised mine too, even though my hand trembled slightly. I didn't know what was happening yet, but every instinct in me screamed danger. It was the first family dinner since I'd come home from the hospital. 3 months ago, I'd lost the baby, our first. Complications, they said, one of those things, but the truth was more complicated. Between the endless tests, the bleeding, and the nights I lay in sterile white rooms listening to the heartbeat slow, something inside me had broken. And still, his mother had insisted on tonight. "It's time we all move on," she'd said. "Family helps heal wounds." Except nothing about this night felt like healing. The air was thick with perfume and false sympathy. I could feel their eyes flicking toward me, measuring, judging. "My name is Jess, I'm 34, and that night was when I finally understood what they were capable of." At the head of the table sat my father-in-law, silent as ever. Beside him, my husband's brothers laughed too loudly at something meaningless. And then there was her, the ex, the woman who'd never quite disappeared from his orbit. She smiled too easily, touched his arm too often, and looked at me with a pity that cut deeper than any insult. My stomach churned. I was ready to leave. Then my mom caught my eye. She didn't speak, just mouthed the words. "There's something in your plate." My chest tightened. I looked down, pretending to fix my napkin again. The food looked normal, perfect, even, but now every bite looked poisoned. And I remembered who had served it. His mother. The same woman who'd hugged me for show but whispered that I wasn't strong enough to carry a child, who told everyone I was fragile, emotional, broken, who once smiled while saying, "Some women just aren't meant to be mothers." Now, she was watching me with that same polite smile, waiting for me to take the first bite. I didn't. I laughed lightly, made a small joke, and set my fork down. My hands trembled beneath the table, but I reached for my phone and opened the camera. Audio on, screen down, recording. I didn't know what she'd done, but I would find out. When everyone was distracted, I pushed my plate slightly forward, pretending I was full. My mom caught the cue. We didn't need words, she knew me too well. Moments later, I excused myself and slipped into the bathroom. My pulse thudded in my ears. I wrapped a small piece of the food in a napkin and hid it in my purse. I felt like I was in some crime thriller, but the fear was real. Because deep down, I already knew, this wasn't just manipulation anymore, it was escalation. In the car, my mom said nothing. She just reached for my hand and held it tightly while I stared out the window. The world outside blurred past, restaurants, neon lights, people laughing, normalcy. It felt like a different planet. I cried quietly, not just for the dinner, for everything. For the child I'd lost. For the husband who'd slowly turned into a stranger. For the way his family had made me feel like I was losing my mind. That night, while he slept beside me, snoring softly like a man with no conscience, I sat at the computer. My hands shook as I opened his email. I don't even know what I was looking for, maybe truth, maybe pain, but what I found burned. Messages between him and his ex. Dates overlapping my hospital stays. Plans, jokes. "She won't last long. You just have to be patient. Once she gives up, we can finally move on." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then I closed my laptop and reached for a new notebook. I wrote names, dates, every small cruelty. This wasn't love. It was a game. And I was about to stop playing by their rules. The next morning, I made a call to a private investigator a friend had once mentioned in passing. I didn't expect much, but when he answered and I gave my name, he paused. "I know who you are," he said quietly. "You need to listen carefully. This isn't the first complaint involving that family." My blood froze. "What do you mean?" He sighed. "I can't tell you everything yet, but I'll say this, don't eat anything that comes from that house. Gather proof, quickly." When I hung up, I looked at my reflection. I barely recognized the woman staring back. Pale skin, dark circles, hollow eyes. I realized that's exactly what they wanted, to drain me until there was nothing left. But they'd made one mistake. I was still here. The next day, my mother-in-law showed up uninvited, all smiles and sweetness. I brought cookies, dear, and flowers, to brighten your day. Her eyes gleamed like glass. She looked around the house like she was inspecting it for damage. You poor thing, she cooed, you really do look tired. Are you sure you're okay? I smiled faintly. I'm getting there. She offered to make tea, insisting I sit and rest. I let her, and while she stirred, my hidden camera, tucked between the vases on the counter, captured everything. The way she slipped her hand into her pocket, the small movement as she dropped something into the mug, the calm, practiced swirl of the spoon. Like someone who'd done it before. That night, I sent the footage to the investigator. 20 minutes later, he replied, "We have enough to open a case." For the first time in months, I felt something like control, not over my pain, but over their fate. And that fed me. A week later, I hosted another dinner, my idea this time. I told them I wanted to start over. They came, of course, him, his mother, even the ex. They couldn't resist a chance to perform. I smiled, poured wine, played the perfect hostess. Every laugh, every gesture was rehearsed. I wasn't the fragile woman they remembered. I was a mirror, reflecting their lies right back at them. When his mother raised a toast, saying, "To family, forgiveness, and moving on," I lifted my glass and smiled. "To truth and justice," I said. They laughed, thinking it was a joke. It wasn't. Because I already knew the tea and cookies had tested positive for toxins. The investigator had confirmed it, low doses, cumulative effect, designed not to kill, but to weaken, to make me seem unstable, forgetful, sick. The perfect setup. A slow, invisible death that could be dismissed as stress or grief. I didn't tell them I knew. I didn't tell them I'd already moved my money, copied the bank records showing my husband's transfers to his ex, and saved every cruel voicemail. I just smiled. Then, 2 days later, I vanished. I told my husband my mother had fallen and needed help. He barely looked up from his phone. "If you need to stay a while, stay," he said. That was it. No questions, no concern, just quiet relief. From a small rented room across town, I logged into the cameras I'd hidden throughout the house. The feed came alive. There they were, his mother, his ex, my husband, laughing, drinking wine from my glasses. The ex sat at the piano, playing. My husband leaned against the counter, smiling at her like I never existed. I watched in silence, my hands cold, my pulse steady. Every second of their betrayal was another move on my board. And I was no longer the broken piece. I was the player. And this time, I wasn't playing to survive. I was playing to win. I sat very still, letting the silence stretch until it felt like an answer. My throat tightened and I swallowed air that tasted like steel. For months the lines of my life had been edited by other hands, cut and pasted, polished and sold back to me as concern. They had scripted my grief into spectacle, my weakness into evidence, but for the first time, I felt the pen slip into my own fingers. That night an email arrived with nothing but an attachment. No sender, no subject, just a square of pixels that opened into a photograph of the street outside the building where I'd been sleeping alone. The sun was low, the light honeyed, and in the bottom corner someone had typed in thin red letters, "Are you alone now?" The image was recent. You could see the faded sticker on the lamppost, the dent in the blue Civic parked 2 cars down, the smear of sunlight on the windows that matched the hour I'd left my room the day before. That click of a shutter, taken from a car, maybe a motorcycle, maybe someone standing under the chestnut tree, felt like a finger laid across my throat. It was the sort of message meant to unmoor you, meant to make me drop everything and run back into the open arms of those who'd done the damage. But whatever their intention, it also made something else click in me, urgency. If they wanted to intimidate, I would not be intimidated. If they wanted me to be small and silent, I would be loud. I called my lawyer before I left the light on in the little room and pretended to listen to music. Her voice was brisk, efficient, the kind of voice that could turn chaos into paperwork. "Start annulment immediately," I told her. "Review every dotted line, every witness signature. I'm sending everything." She didn't ask why I'd waited. She asked what I'd found and how soon I could get her hard copies. When I described the contract, different versions with edits in different hands, A witness signature traced too neatly over an older ink smudge. Her tone shifted from counsel to a hunter. "This isn't just a civil clawback," she said. "Falsification, contract fraud, emotional coercion. If we play this right, the criminal division will want to look at it. He'll come out of this with less than he came in." I wanted them to have less than that. I wanted their names to be tied to consequences that matched the quiet cruelty they'd practiced for years. While she set the wheels in motion, I texted an expert recommended by a cousin once removed. The forensic handwriting analyst replied within the hour. Her report was clinical and devastating. The supposed witness signature on the partnership contract was a deliberate forgery, practiced to mimic an old woman's looping hand, my mother-in-law's, but with pressure and spacing that gave it away to anyone who knew what to look for. She interfered in multiple sections. The expert wrote, "Not a hesitant, single forger. This was done by someone who understood the document, its purpose, and how to hide it." That sentence felt like an incision. For the first time I saw the architecture of the lie in bright relief, the pressure, the placement, the intent. It gave me leverage. It gave me a way out. That night I did something I'd been afraid to do. I uploaded everything into a secure cloud folder and sent it, anonymously, to 2 journalists in different states. No voice, no face, just dates, photographs, emails, bank records, audio. I labeled folders with care: dates, payments, witnesses, tea cookies. It felt reckless and right. The reaction was fast. The ex scrubbed her profiles clean. My mother-in-law's number went dead. My husband tried to reach my mother with messages that said he was worried for me. Worried. His text read, "About my mental state." My mother answered one sentence that made my knees go weak with relief. "Jess isn't crazy, she's just not quiet anymore." Her words were small and enormous all at once. For the first time in a long while, my mother and I were truly on the same side. It steadied me in a way nothing else had. Then the world outside my plans started rotating. The investigator called to say Helen, my mother-in-law, had been found in another state staying with a cousin. She was spinning the story: defamation, harassment, a smear campaign. But reporters were already on the move. The prosecutor's office had been alerted. Victims who'd been quiet for years were readying voices that had been kept small. That should have been the crescendo. It wasn't. An anonymous envelope arrived days later with 3 words printed on a single sheet: "You'll lose everything." In the footer was a name I knew only from the tabloids: the defender of the untouchable, the lawyer who made chaos look like a legal strategy. It meant she still had allies. It meant this war would get filthier. But they were no longer the only players. In the hours after the cloud folder went public, one of its directories was downloaded more than 20,000 times. The truth had teeth. It was being chewed on and spat out across states and feeds. And, as quickly as praise came, so did an attempt at obliteration. Someone tried to access my bank. A phishing screen blinked on, and then failed. Whoever had the skill to reach that far now knew I'd opened the fight. Minutes after the failed transfer attempt, an encrypted email landed in my inbox. No header, no sender, just a PDF and a single line: "She destroyed my career, but not my memory." The file inside was a dossier compiled by a former colleague of Helen's, a psychiatrist who'd been pushed out years ago. He outlined altered patient records, prescriptions changed without notation, diagnoses suggested to benefit relatives of wealthy patients, signed affidavits, original emails, the kind of medical malfeasance that, once visible, would not be covered with an apology. I sent the dossier to my lawyer and the journalists. They called back with the same word: damning. When the reporter published the piece, Helen Parker's name printed, her record laid bare, the fallout was immediate. The medical board issued a terse statement, the hospital released a clumsy apology and then, under pressure, ordered an audit. The foundation that had accepted Helen's philanthropic face for years found its accounts frozen pending review. I stayed quiet through it all. Being invisible felt powerful. I let their panic make noise. I let the facts do my shouting for me. My husband, when he called, sounded small and hollow. He pleaded, cried, tried to stitch together explanations that had no seams. "I didn't know," he said. "They told me. You weren't trapped," I said, and my voice was flat as glass. "You were comfortable." He begged for forgiveness, but remorse is not a substitute for the months of complicity. I hung up. The wrenching grief that had made space for him no longer had room for his excuses. Justice, I understood then, wouldn't feel like triumph so much as reckoning. It wouldn't be swift, it would be precise. The papers would print, The board would investigate, the village would hiss, and some doors would slam shut forever. But the thing I wanted most, besides safety, was to hold them accountable in a way that could be measured, archived, referenced. So I kept collecting. I kept sharing with those who could amplify the truth. I kept my head down and my notebooks open. The final act I would write wouldn't be a scream in the dark. It would be a file folder, a signature, a court docket, paper and pixels and witnesses, and when the curtain finally fell, it would fall on their names.